chemistry, you're okay usually, depending on what program you're in. But this is not a hard rule. This is just a recommendation, right? So we've seen people that have done their MCATs and received excellent scores who were in U1 and U3, right? So that's okay. Just be well prepared. Okay, so are there any questions so far? Yeah.
So say you do the test, when do you get the results so that you could give them in?
Yeah, okay, so that's an excellent question. When do you get your results? 30 days is the answer. 30 days after you write the test. So you get your results 30 days later. Okay? Now, there are a few reasons for that. One, they need the time to grade it, but you're like, well, wait a minute, isn't it a computerized test? Yeah. So maybe they don't need all that much time to grade it, but they do still have to grade essays, so we'll give that to them. And there are a lot of people writing these tests, so we'll give that to them. But there's another reason is you're not allowed to rewrite the test within 30 days of your attempt, let's say, or your administration. So if you write the test one day, you can't even write it 30 days later. And so this makes sure of that. So you don't have your score, you can't write a test, and you don't even know if you have to write your test. It also means that you can't go and book every test date in advance and like just do like 5 tests and hope you get the best one out of them, right? So that's one issue, yes?
But you know when you want to write it, but you're not sure what you're doing in the summer. Like you want to write it in the summer, but you don't know whether you're going to be in Montreal or like somewhere else. Can you change the location?
Yes.
Can you book the date and then change the location that you're writing it?
Yeah, you can, once you've booked your date, you can change the location, like even the day before your exam if there are spots. But there's a fee associated with it, so I think it's 50 US or something, but check their website because they change the fees all the time. So you can do that, yeah. No problem. All right, so, okay, so you can write, so how many times can you write this test? Essentially, you're allowed writing this test up to 3 times in 1 year. So 3 times in 1 year. So it all, and plus you have that 30-day period that you have to allow to elapse, right? So writing an exam in, let's say May, for example, is not such a bad idea because then you can rewrite in July and you have more time to rewrite if you decide to in July. Okay, so if there are no other questions, we'll talk about the structure of the MCAT. What are the different sections? How many questions? You know, and I'll give you a few inside details. Yeah.
I know you talk about this later, but do schools care about how many times you write it? Like, will you vote more negatively if you vote it?
Okay, so that's a very good question too, and the answer is it's subjective. It depends on the school. So let's say you wrote it 3 times or 5 times, right? So which score are they going to look at? Call them and ask them. Write them an email because there are 3 possibilities. So they're either going to take the average, they're either going to take the best, or they're either going to take the most recent. Yeah, and it depends who's making the decisions for that particular year, but usually each university has a certain policy. Yeah?
So if you want to send your MCAT scores, you have to send all of them. You can't really...
You do not have the choice. In fact, it is not you who sends your MCAT scores. It is you who informs the AAMC that you want the scores sent to the university. And so they actually send it on your behalf. And they send all of them every time. You can't just select. Also, I believe certain universities, even if they don't require the MCAT, I read on the McGill website last summer that if you have written it, you have to present it. So that's, but I mean, how do they know? Did they find out? I don't know. Okay, so, right. Okay, so let's talk about the structure of the MCAT, the test duration, and the different sections that are on there. Okay. So let's take a look at the anatomy of the MCAT. So how many sections are there? 4. They group them up sometimes, okay? So we're going to list these one by one. So when you get into the MCAT, you sit down, you click next. Okay, so the exam starts. What's the first section that you see? Not bio. And there's a reason it's not bio, because you all love bio and they don't want to give that to you right away. They want to give it to you once you're like practically half dead, okay? Physical science, why? Because most of you hate physical science, right? Who here hates physical science? Yeah, I'm not going to raise my hand, I can't. Okay, so physical sciences, because many bio students, physics, bio, doesn't go well together, and they know that. So you do your physical sciences, fine, and what's the next section after that?
Verbal reasoning.
Verbal reasoning, okay? Not organic, that comes later. Okay, so verbal reasoning, interesting section. It's subjectively, depending on who you talk to, one of the hardest sections of the MCAT. On top of that, many universities will put more emphasis on this section than the others. Why? Because unlike what Samir was explaining during the interviews where they're asking you to communicate with someone non-verbally, they actually do want you to communicate very clearly. Okay, so they want to see if you can communicate non-verbally in some instances, right? So that could happen during an interview. But in general, they want to have good communicators. And it's not just for your patients during your clinical years, but it is also to communicate with your colleagues, with your management and all of that, right? So this is quite important, okay? It's the hardest section by many people's opinions because it's not like math, it's not physics, you can't apply a formula and you get an answer. It's a different passage every time. Sometimes they're tedious, they're boring. It's on history. I mean, maybe you love history, but it could be on literature, art, so like really dry topics and intentionally so. And they could be really convoluted, really complicated, and it's not clear as to what they're even asking you in the first place. We'll talk about a bit more about that later. So besides verbal reasoning, what else do we have? What's next? It's not bio yet. There's one more.
Essay writing.
Essay writing. From my experience, one of the section many people hate, but the easiest one to improve on. Okay, because there's a formula, and we'll talk about that. The last section is biological science. Okay, so here's the breakdown of the different categories in the MCAT. So let's talk about these one by one. Physical sciences. Has anyone, by the way, written practice MCAT or the real MCAT? Raise your hands. Okay, good. So, I mean, definitely this is something you're going to do ad nauseum once you're seriously going to start preparing for this exam. Okay, so for those of you who have done the exam, it's in the back. How long is the physics section? Do you remember? Have you done a practice test?
Yeah, like an hour and 20 minutes maybe?
Yeah, very close, an hour and 15 minutes. So it's actually 75 minutes. How many questions do you have? 17, no. 90 questions in 75 minutes? Absolutely not.
So many passage-based and so many standalones.
Yeah, some are passage-based, some are standalone. Total, 52. Thank God it's not 90. Okay, so 52 questions. Now, as you mentioned, so 85% of these are, I'm just going to write PBQ, passage-based questions, and 15% are freestanding questions, FSQ. Okay? This has a huge implication. Why? Because which one do you think is easier? Freestanding, of course, because the passages are on like quantum accelerators and electrophoresis and all these strange things we might not be used to. They might be for a defibrillator or and there are things you're like, oh my God, we didn't have to know that, we didn't study that, and that's okay. They just want to intimidate you. They want to see if you can objectively say, okay, hold on, I don't need to know how a defibrillator works, but all the information is here, right? So sit down, take a step back, don't get emotional about it. Keep your eye on the clock and think, like, what information do I need to answer this question? Okay? And there's a whole set of strategies around that. Okay? You're also going to do these ones first because they're easier and they're fast, and you don't want to do them at the end once your brain is fried and your eyes are crossed. Okay, so do them early. So what about content? What topics are there? Because I mentioned before that there were 5 topics. There's arguably 6 topics on the MCAT. So what are the 5 or 6 topics? So here, I only have 4 categories. So that means there's more than one category here. So what are the topics here?
Physics and earth.
Chemistry.
Yeah,
Okay.
physics and chemistry. 50-50. 50% physics, 50% chemistry, particularly GChem, general chemistry. It's about half-half. What I've noticed is they like asking you general chemistry questions that are very biology-like. Okay, so they're gonna talk about, you know, the like the pH in your stomach and the ionic transfer across the boundary and stuff like that. And you might have to know a few rules from biology, so they can mix the topics. So this isn't pure physics and pure chemistry. They'll get some passages which are a bit of both. They'll get some passages which are a bit of both with a bit of biology, right? So you know, be aware of that. Okay, so the score of this exam, and that's what we all really care about, right? That's the goal here. So the score is on what exactly? Yes. The percentile is a totally different ballgame. Right, but I'm asking you for a maximum score, and that's independent of who writes it. Yeah, it's on 15. Okay. So the score is on 15. What's a competitive score? Don't say 15. Yeah, 10 is competitive. In fact, these 3 sections here are all scored on 15, and that's a competitive score for all of them. What is the average? 8. Yeah, 7, 8 for all of them, give or take. Okay, so that's why we say 10 is a competitive score. So, okay, let's keep that in mind. Let's keep moving. So next.